the recorder. So we're in the beginnings of just maybe one step taken on playtesting um, the game structure we've been developing for the last couple of weeks, and currently we're inside a scenario of playing around with a role that we're defining by aspects, and people are proposing which kind of aspects they could be. Um, and that is the situation where we find ourselves at. But yeah, any proposals? Like, what would be for you interesting, continuing from Pablo's first proposal or not, like thing to define in a role?
So it's about like really making an example of a role.
Yeah, like example or a proto playing piece, because at any point the example could turn into, okay, we put this in an organization, and now there's like almost like a construction yard of an organization has one building or one wall, however you want to think about it. Yeah. And just to help, you can also approach this in a manner that you say, like, free-formally what would be interesting, and we can then think about it, how to translate it to aspects and so on, like, just to help in this very early playstorming situation.
Or we could also even like not agonize over it, but just take
Yeah,
something, right?
exactly.
So what do you like thinking of? Like I could say sunflowers.
Yeah, like actually engage that organizational situation, like which is interesting because it's this possibility of playing meta or pressing play. Like, you can imagine this game. This is not really written in the document, but it's a complete possibility to play, like press pause and move to meta and adjust and then press play, and suddenly we're in this situation. Actually, let's do that. Like, um, how about, Pablo, you ask your questions, you can improvise also, like maybe add others if you come up with a better one, and if there you want to be the one who answers, can be somebody else. Um, maybe everybody can answer if they have interesting answers. And we are now essentially in this yet unformed organization, but a fragment of it. Is that okay for you, Pablo, to
Yes.
be this question? Yeah, good.
Yeah. I guess I'm mostly interested in the topic of interest of those who answer is one of those topics that sort of have this obsessive quality, not in a bad way, but that you sort of like keep going back to it, and it maybe becomes a context for you with which you approach other things in your life, something that really is in your mind very often, maybe that kind of interest.
So you're asking for, in a way, an obsession in this manner.
Yeah, but I feel the word obsession has a negative connotation too, like to an unhealthy amount, and I'm not necessarily looking for that. Maybe something that has more of a organizing principle into one's perspective.
And while we might be thinking of a separate word, but since you already described your take on it, people can think of how they could answer that. And meanwhile, everybody can think, like, what kind of organization or what kind of effect it has on the organization that it has this kind of question as defining something that is then present in the organization. Like, it can create this, like it's almost like opening the page of the role and seeing that there is listed this not obsession kind of thing. Um, so how would you answer that? What is your not obsession?
maybe I can just give an example of
Mm.
something I'm thinking about. I'm thinking of my answer, or one of my answers would be textures. Like I just seem to see, like, walk in the streets and just be very focused on textures that come from overlapping of circumstances. I don't know, like the tiling on the floor and the shadow of the trees over the tiling on the floor, and how the two things sort of like overlap. Those type. I'm just like constantly fixating on texture. So I think that could be like a nice, not that we have to go further with that, but maybe like some of the meta things I'm asking for, like this, maybe something generic and general, but that you sort of like keep coming back to.
Now, this is interesting. I would highlight here, in a way, a couple of things that would be possible in this kind of game structure. Like now, of course, it would be better that we even write this down, but let's just use what we have. It's like there would be this structure of each row containing this, could be compulsion also, rather than obsession. Is that better? Compulsion.
Yeah, I like it more.
Yeah, okay. That they ask for your compulsion. I didn't find others that would be like a compulsion. Let's use that for now. So there is that. Like, and then there is like how that's produced, and then it is essentially asking the person to answer this question, like, what is your compulsion? Um, and and then you could add like to that um, maybe the answer has to be given in a certain form, like a short text, or you could even say that it has to have like like almost like a concept, like a word or a phrase, and then a definition. Like in your case, it would have been, say, in a form of patterns, or sorry, textures, and then your description there. And we also have, like, if this would be played down, is that we have that form like a fragment of a role, which allows us to speculate its effect of that fragment to possible organizations. But somebody could even, in a further game, play by taking your compulsion. That they, oh, I create my role of taking this Pablo's compulsion of textures and their definition, and play that in this organization. Or I like it, I take it. The reasons could be many. So in a way, everything you create, which is kind of in the principles of the rules in the very beginning, um, um, like the whole principles part, it's precisely for this reason, by the way, there, or to note this down, that in a way everything becomes a playing piece. Like everything is frameable as a pattern that can be played. Everything is frameable as a version. So even your answer is a playing piece, potentially. Which I think is cool, because I don't know a game that is so highly um, like systematically generative, but maybe I'm too nerdy about it. But but okay, but how would others answer? Let's if we play this situation, what is your compulsion? So we have like comparison points. What kind of things it creates?
I suppose I can chime in, but it's a bit odd, I suppose. But at some level, limitations. I mean,
Mm.
understanding personal limitations,
Mm.
and kind of, I think about it as relational limitations. So,
Mm.
in the sense how my compulsion is to draw into relationships with people where I see that where I have my personal limitations on some subject or some knowledge or experience of something, I see that I gravitate towards those that kind of fill the gap, in a sense, not necessarily objectifying them in that way, but finding where there's those kind of gaps, or finding where there's kind of those lacunas or just holes, and seeing that kind of yeah, my compulsion is just to draw towards those types of individuals or people. I hope that makes sense to some extent, but yeah, I guess just limitations are something I'm compulsively thinking about in this case, existentially too.
I think that's a really it's a great answer. I like the kind of contemplative way you processed it, and there was a lot to think about in that. In a kind of like moving one level up, I look at it like this question, what is your compulsion? So far, it's produced two interesting answers, and maybe it's useful then, but like it's because we can play on this multiple levels, and I think like this is interesting to reflect on point of what kind of uh, answers does the question, what is your compulsion, generate? And it so far it seems so good. So far so good, I would say. But then also like I like the particular answer as well. And maybe if that would be written in some form, and somebody might like to play it or make a modification of it and take because it speaks to them. As you probably noticed, there is this high everything is shareable kind of principles written into the game where everything is potentially usable by everything else. Aggressive open source. Okay, anybody else want to try to answer that?
Somehow, like, I would rather answer like, what do you like thinking of? Because it somehow like produces something else, which I find interesting. Also, another question that came to my mind is like, what keeps you awake at night? Or what not at night, but what keeps you awake when you can't sleep? But what do you like thinking of? I really like to think about kindness and how to, I don't know, like give and receive pleasure. This I really like thinking of.
I think you're making a move of actually introducing like another fragment, which is like, what if there is another question, maybe separate, maybe joined, that there is this question, what do you like thinking of? Or maybe what do you like to think at night, or whatever, however you want to put it. And we could jump to play that, that you're making that question. You can formulate it like, what is the exact form you would like to ask it, and then people can answer that, and that kind of moves us into almost like another spot in the speculative organization. So what would be your form, how we phrase it as like a short question?
What do you mean, like in terms of my answer?
I mean, you could even answer it by yourself, just like Pablo did. But let's start with that. Just like Pablo had this question, and you proposed another kind of question. So let's have a similar situation to you as Pablo had. He had this question of what is your compulsion? So, like, I was just asking, can you shorten the question into kind of short form, and in a way ask it? And of course, you're free to answer it yourself, just like Pablo did.
I don't think I get it, but I mean, like what I mentioned with the kindness, it was connected to the question of what do you like thinking of. It's already there here.
Okay, sorry, I missed it. So, okay, then the situation would be.
But then I just gave another question: what keeps you awake at night? So any of you can answer to that.
I mean, you could play both or either or. Like, which one you would like to start with?
I can start with answering that one. So it would be, and then this is the next question. That should go, I guess, down here. So I made a double move.
Yeah, and it's fine in this situation, and it's completely proper in Playstorming to fiddle with the rules. Uh, to but you could like this could be open for others. Like, how would you answer either of these questions? And of course, this is still in the context of thinking that this is defining a role, but generally, how would you answer either one?
I think it's quite interesting that both questions have like very similar. They ask a similar thing, but with very different sort of like I have very different opposing even sensations about each. Maybe what do I like thinking of is for me something constructive and positive and that puts a smile on my face. Well, something that keeps me awake at night is something that maybe not super worrisome, but definitely there's like a sensation of preoccupation, I would say. But so I like sort of like that they are slightly cousins in sort of like what they ask, but with different vibes.
Mm,
So, for example, textures do not keep me awake at night, right? Even if I like thinking of them, or if I could see them as a fixation or compulsion.
mm,
But maybe, and this is, I guess, related to Dustin's relational limitations, sort of like friendship, connections, fostering friendship, or being close to people in a thoughtful way keeps me awake at night, for example.
mm. And in terms of um, the the game situation, like we are at the same time evaluating, like speculating on the effects of these kind of questions, which or we can evaluate. This is kind of material. Of course, it's material that is played. You could think maybe in a organization that happens in serious actuality, things might be slightly different, but playing them already takes you a little bit to the direction of seeing the effects of what kind of answers people have. I think it takes you far enough that it's substantial to see these answers. Um, uh, I've been intentionally not answering partly to kind of encourage everybody else to, uh, jump in a way more uh, than otherwise. Um, I think like, but in general, I could say like the compulsion fixation. Um, that is interesting question. Like I could think of maybe many things on that, and then I like the kind of what keeps you awake at night because there's like this sort of interesting concreteness to it. I find that what you like thinking of, like harder, like it almost feels that I should answer something positive to it, like on. Uh, but what keeps you awake at night kind of opens up in this sort of concrete situation where you start remembering things that have kept you awake at night and what kind of things there could be, like um, uh, like if I would answer it, I would say what keeps you awake at night is um, like structures that are twisted or in knots, like when you're in a structure and then there's this one point that is just this jumble of things which you don't know what's actually happening there. Those kind of things keep me awake at night, which I think is an interesting answer in itself potentially, and or at least it kind of makes me reflect in an interesting manner, personally speaking.
Perhaps to clarify, because I think I'm a bit lost in, let's say, the levels of
what's happening. So
Mhm.
we are
It's
like
okay.
playtesting the like how it can look like if we define a role through aspects. Now, a few people shared the different aspects. Just trying to summarize whether to
Mhm.
check whether I'm getting correctly. So Pablo and Pia and Dustin shared the different aspects, which is the yeah, like the compulsion and what you like thinking about, and then we are on the level of answering those questions. But those kinds of, is it still part of defining kind of the roles as a blueprint, or are we already kind of playing the role also? Yeah, I think I'm getting lost a little bit, like
Yeah.
what part is kind of the blueprint creation and what part is already kind of playing it, or is it
Yeah, and then I think it's a good question because there it is actually. I think that ultimately some is very much structurable, but it's unconventional, and that makes it maybe slightly more confusing. And especially when you're kind of early playtesting, those kind of situations can be confusing. But if we summarize, like first we can think that like I actually like the pause play button as a good starting point because it's probably understandable that that in a way like you can play in a way of like almost like this organization or its construction yard, which is like the virtual game board being on pause, and you're adding a role to it. But then if you find, for example, like Pablo's question that is interesting, you can press play, which is essentially jumping into a scope, which in this case was Pablo's question being asked and people answering. It's like this sort of fragmentary moment in a speculative organization, like a speculative moment, which is typical in play. That many times, I mean, people call it fiction or imaginary, how a moment in play exists, but this is really the same thing. Um, and what is created there then becomes a point of evaluation, reflection, interpretation. Oh, that's what might happen with if one asks this question. It's like grist for the mill for evaluating what are the actual effects of having this kind of question as a defining towards the role. And I think that's its main use. Uh, um, Now, in addition, and this where things get unconventional, whatever we create, like if we leave a record of this play and put these pieces, like, oh, here's a role, and in that role, one of its definers is topic of interest, and how the topic of interest is defined is by a question, say, what's your compulsion or what keeps you up awake at night. All of those could be played, and even further, like if we include these answers, somebody later playing could, for example, propose for themselves a role, like that there is a role template that has this question, what is your, say, compulsion? And then they actually take a version of, say, Pablo's answer of textures, and they play as a role for them. The last part is completely in line with structure, but it might get so unconventional. I don't think one has to think about that yet so much. I think it comes through just practice of things. But I think these first things, like that there's always like in a way, the pause, the level above, the meta level of looking at the construction yard and putting pieces. It's almost like a video game where you're looking at like a strategic map of a city. And then there is the play, which is like now you actually jumped into a certain point in the city and the things that you have put in start to run. Like Pablo making this question and somebody answering. But once again, you can always press pause and go back to the building. It's really like that.
yeah,
If
yeah,
that
thank
makes
you.
any that makes
Yeah,
any sense.
it
And
makes a lot of sense.
yeah, because like I think what is unconventional here is I think part of the potential, like because like there are not that many these kind of structures. Like you can trace it in some places, um, But of course, in video games, they're kind of limited to whatever is coded. And on the other hand, in role-play games and board games, these kind of things are, these kind of structures are not really used so much. So it's like potential for finding new things. In practice, I also find that there is a strength here, which of course would have to be explicated and clarified and told. But that strength being that actually being able to switch these modes is powerful, because if you're good at playing, then you're good at saying, okay, I actually want to now think about the organization in general, and I want to think about like another kind of an effect. So I'll go to I press pause and go to the meta mode and propose another thing. Or you could be thinking, hey, I'm not really sure what this topic of interest and the question put there produces. So I ask to press play for that reason. And further, if the game really is played and there are these all the moves that others have made, which you could play instead of playing an empty piece, you have this library of things that you don't have to always start with a blank canvas. Like every painted canvas is potentially start of your addition to the organization. And I think that combination is, if clarified and explicated, is potentially rather powerful.
Yeah, thanks. And I think like what would have helped me, but perhaps it happened and I missed it, would be perhaps being a bit more explicit in when we are actually pressing the pause or play.
Yeah, you're right. I think you're right. Like, I mean, like I said, it's a version 0.1, and like all of these things eventually would have to be there. Like I think it's a proposal. Like, let's say what could have happened if things would have been more clear. Say when Pablo proposed that there is this interest, and it comes in the form of what is your compulsion. Pablo or anybody else could have proposed, let's press play, and you, Pablo, are the questionnaire, and then say everybody can be the one who is questioned. And then people would say, okay, and then we enter that situation. And then somebody, there could be also like that somebody can then propose, let's press pause again. We have enough of this material, and now things are paused, and then another thing can be proposed. So I think it's clarifiable. That's the key thing. But it's yet to be done, but essentially.
Thanks.
I would like to propose another define aspect for a role, just to kind of create a different perspective, and that would be a move. And just for the sake of interest, I think it's the same role, which has now in its definition some of these questions. Of course, we haven't defined what actually officially went there or not, but that I don't think we need to do that now. But we can think like maybe all the questions are somehow there. But I would say that there is a move. I'll write it. I'll try a form. And then sorry, I'm thinking of how to word it.
So really quick, would a move be within kind of, again, a space constraints, or within
Say again.
I mean, okay, so
say again, you were cutting off.
Sorry, I was just asking specifically concerning this notion of move. So with this move, would it be within what we've already been provided with? So for example, if we were going to do Pablo's textures, or because the recurring theme has been kind of knots, and or what you guys have both been discussing, let's say with knots or some type of elements or some types of forms or something along these lines. And so would that entail that I'm just asking, what exactly is a move
Yeah,
entail? I mean, like am I going from one space to another? Is it like, and then I articulate what I've done and made that move, and then I hand it over to someone else, kind of scenario? Or maybe you're probably going to paint it. So, but
yeah,
I was just curious.
yeah. Move is an interesting concept that has been developed quite a bit in the last, say, 10 years. And once again, there are uh, certainly pieces from the kind of powered by the apocalypse games, but then I'm also like thinking of uh, there's another game system called Belonging Outside Belonging, which has some interesting takes on the concept of moves. So these are some of the sources. But what it essentially means, a move is like, I mean, we can use this one that I was writing here as an example. It's certainly not the best worded, but it is something that you can do. Like essentially, it's a right-like thing. Like in the description, I think I wrote something that is the purest form of like a right. Like let's if one looks at this example, is that in this case every role, or at least this particular role, would have the moves can write a thing that we are not thinking of um, to a scene considerations board, and this is assuming that there is another definition of a scene yet to be defined, which is like uh, considerations board, which is maybe it's a virtual one. It's a certain, like, maybe it's at the top of a certain document. Maybe it's a certain place in the web page. Maybe it's a physical one. Like if the physical space, it's put on, I don't know, the coffee room on the wall. There's a considerations board. And then everyone essentially has the move, which is essentially right, that you can write a thing that we're not thinking of, but oh, sorry. I think um, uh, what I meant to say, what we should think that we're not thinking of, but we should. Uh, so, and why I'm thinking of this move is like, what is an effect if you have this sort of like you almost like create its own medium that that uh, that you're essentially instigating people um, to or nudging people to think of what are we missing, but then you're creating this sort of form for it, that there is a place where they're visible, and then you give this move where everyone can go and add these things that we're not thinking of but we should, um, uh, and that's kind of what I was after with that. And I think it characterizes a move in the sense that move is well, at its purest, it's something you can do by the definition of the move itself. It can, by the way, contain also conditions. Like, for example, if uh, it's daytime, or if uh, there are no people in the building, or whatever the condition is, you can blah, blah, blah. So that's a kind of a form that has been working quite well in many of these games. Um, and has been become kind of more and more present as this sort of interesting way of being kind of free to write um, kind of sentence-like definitions, but then those really become this sort of like way to also mechanize like what is possible. So yeah, that's hopefully some uh, to some extent understandable way of defining a move.
I think it was really interesting that in this move that you made, to consider it a move, you also sort of like did an additional move of creating the scene of
Yeah,
the considerations board, right?
yeah.
It
I
was,
kind of implicated it. It's
yeah, it
not yet
was like like a fast tracking of the scene
yeah,
considerations board that we could later discuss.
yeah.
But for example, if it is a thing that we're not thinking of, but we should, I would name that board the absence board. Because if we should, then it's not something to be considered, but something that is
Okay.
genuinely missing. And the moment that they stop being absent, it's either because they're present or because we do not consider them absent anymore.
Yeah,
Maybe it's a better way to frame
yeah,
how these things get resolved.
yeah. And you're completely right. That's exactly what happened. And I did it for a couple of reasons, like also playing around with what is possible in this sort of additions, and because sometimes whether you're making a move or something else, it kind of creates these ideas. Well, this needs a place, and um, and of course, in the language of this game, the the places, etc., are be given this framework of a scene. But I also wanted to add it to maybe highlight the sort of flexibility of the scene idea. And this would need a lot of, like in a polished game, a lot of help and definition of how to think about the scene for the players. Because like I could throw this to, let's say, an experienced player of not just Apocalypse World, but many, many games, because the scene concepts are present in many, and they probably could work with that. But then, like, you cannot expect that, so you would have to kind of give that help in as part of the game itself. But the idea is like essentially um, um, uh, like just summarize before Dustin has to leave, like like the benefit of thinking, say, just the board as a scene is to be able to kind of build this analytic to it. For example, that scene could contain an item, and that item could define that it's a physical board, and that's then an item that um, uh, has kind of a function. It's been put uh, in the rules, and, but then it could also contain rules of how to use it. So it could be another place where this move could be, maybe even a better place, but here it was maybe illustrative to put it in the role. Um, but it could contain something else, like it could contain, say, a rule that it has this weekly session of like looking everything written on it and at least reading through and commenting them, for example. And so this allows this flexibility to think about something that is physical being at the same time gameable, while thinking also something that is like abstract, like a project, to be also kind of in this sort of game-like definition realm. So I wanted to kind of illustrate that possibility by adding it here. Because I do think there is power in this sort of having this scene as a concept, but uh, that's I think for me one illustration of that. But yeah, Dustin, do you have any final words before you have to leave?
Not at this moment. Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm just trying to learn by osmosis, so I'm absorbing everything. So, but yeah, not presently. I think you just illustrated about the move aspect.
Yeah,
So, but I assume I'll have more questions, of course, next week. So I think for now, I'm hoping I'll get to be playing. Yeah, Powered by the Apocalypse very soon. So maybe I might be playing it this weekend. So
it will certainly help. I
yeah,
think
I think so. Yeah.
yeah, it will definitely, because you will actually see a lot of these thinking models. There's differences as well, and this is kind of combining the microscope space, which is very
Mm.
different to Apocalypse World space. But I do think that helps, um, and I think it really why it's good to have this sort of like playstorming sessions is like I think these kind of things can really be learned, but even kind of seen in detail only by kind of playing around with them. Maybe that's the good. It's not like playing in like strict sequence, but playing around with them.
Could I ask, do you imagine we could play actually one of, for example, altogether some, I mean, microscope would be a long session. Any of these would be long sessions, but I'm just.
You can play a fragment of it.
Yeah, I was just, or we could play, I'm just proposing, would that be of interest to anybody, or would that be, would you be willing to do something like that? I don't know.
Yeah, we actually have even from a couple of months back, like a version of microscope hacked to organizations.
Okay, I'll check it out then.
I don't think it's I'm thinking of is it before the videos or not, but we can talk about this because we could also like bring that and develop that further because it's quite close to microscope. Essentially uses the same structure, but it's hacked to the considerations of being an organization. Like I can tell how it works. So that's also a possibility, but we can talk about that because that's we can also play the normal microscope. That's a possibility as well.
Okay.
But yeah, and I think we're kind of nearing finish generally because like Thea has to go soon, and also in terms of time we are in the 1.5 hour range, which is the kind of minimal or the default length of the session. Everything else is extra. So I would maybe ask from everybody, like anything else you would like to address, ask, add, related to everything that has taken place, or anything that has taken place.
Perhaps what is now like strongly on my mind is when you framed when you mentioned that we can frame let's say the consideration board or some other kind of a space or physical space, that we can frame it as a scene. So for me it kind of came alive kind of as an adding list, like this augmented layer of like new affordances which can then prompt or implement, like making the actual world around you playable through. So this was very, this is kind of very alive for me, and I really like it, and we'll be thinking about this more.
I really like your wording because I think you're totally getting it. Totally, that's the point. And it's also like putting everything in that same medium, whether it's a physical thing, an abstract idea, they all kind of near each other by going to the center of this sort of playability. They create these affordances, and that allows for also like jumping between them. Like you have this move, but it then connects to this physical space. But because they both kind of work by this sort of playable affordances, they speak the same language in a way. And this is part of the potential power once the structure starts to clarify itself and become a little bit more defined and so on. But I think you're totally on point how you define the potential there.
Yeah, thanks.
What about others? Any comments, questions, whatever?
I can just share like two things that came to my mind. One thing is that I'm kind of excited about this, like how we started now to just think of a role and not coming from this top down of we have this organization and this needs these people, so we are headhunting for these people, but kind of having the heads already or the body. And from what they want to take on as a role, you can construct an organization. So it's kind of really like the other way around, which I found really interesting. And the other thing was just like a reference to tarot that I saw in your move that you made. So I guess also because like I encounter it often like in tarot readings that you draw a card for something that you're not thinking of, but you should take into consideration, or you could take into consideration. So I think like yeah, like also games or like what you mentioned now, this powered by apocalypse. I think like they can be just kind of yeah, source material also to develop these kind of worlds and scenes and ultimately organization.
Yeah, like I think that's something to be explored, the source material. Uh, and I think it's like I will think about it. I will try to maybe post some uh, like some I like it's hard to post like full books because like posting 5 books is putting like uh, um, uh, and but I could maybe make screenshots or something like this. Maybe that works because that might be a kind of practically approachable thing. Like how does a certain game define a move or a stake? And it's not that that's some kind of a Bible for us, because, like I said, this is intentionally expanding. Like that, there are good approaches in Microscope, there are good approaches in Apocalypse World, there are good approaches in belonging outside belonging games, like Wonder Home is one of them, and others. Like and then how we can actually create this form that can take some of the aspects of each and create a new thing. But I think that could be served by putting some snippets for people, yeah, to see. Um, but I think it's promising, like in the sense, like in this early playstorming, it's the worst situation. There's least experience. You're putting in the hardest challenge. That there's no knowledge of playing practices. There is no previous ways to see, and the structure itself is not clarified, and things are question marks. So it's more challenging. You have to be both living in the house and building the house. You have to need both skills. But I think the potential. I really like both Jakub's comment and Thea's comment, because both are getting like really and bringing this sort of like precisely what you said in the beginning of your comment there. This sort of like how you can start to approach organization well from many directions, but totally kind of like from different perspectives than the serious, where do we get the money, and the specialist skills. Of course, you can even start from those in this game if you want, but it's now possible to do something completely different as well. It's kind of like a construction yard for a labyrinth that is an organization where you can be both above the labyrinth and inside the labyrinth, and drop yourself off into any part of the labyrinth as well. At least that's one metaphor for it, or allegory. But hey, I found this very promising and fertile, and I like it. I like messy game situations, so I'm hopefully your tolerance to them is equal. But and also like but seeing this, like when it's a thing is in its worst, least defined state and it still shows promise, that's usually the sign that you have something good. That's the only thing you need. It's the rest is kind of adding and holding things. And of course, the things like the certainly the aspects, but even the elements, maybe there's other things that could be there, and things can be changed. It's just a kind of way to put some form to it, to have it be at least somehow usable so far. And let's work on that together. But it would be really interesting to get to a point that in some form, some way, this can be an output publication, whatever it's called, from this group. Like I think it would be totally in character that it's kind of in everybody's name, and something that is worked together. And there are so many aspects to it. Even this, like that every specific answer, etc., is a new potential playing piece. It's a really interesting structural thing. Like, and really, I don't quite know to that extent any other form that would have it. Like there are so many things in it that I think is interesting perspectives to bring on others' table as well. So yeah, thanks everybody. Any wishes for next time? Maybe that's the last good question. Continuance, some change of perspective, whatever.
I can't be there next time again. I'm in my further education.
It can happen. It's okay.
Yeah.
Perhaps I was reminded that when we and then last time when we were mentioning that there could even at some point perhaps be like the connection to, let's say, some kind of software implementation. So I was doing some progress in
Great.
Rust kind of Bevy thing. So perhaps that could be just like a short part saying like, okay,
Definitely,
so what could be started? What could I or us already start kind of bringing to the virtual space or playing it with it in there? So that's my proposal.
I think, yeah, let's definitely have that as a topic, because it's also to help you. Of course, it's a process to think about what it is, but to get it going, also kind of include others, because there might be interesting ideas to how to approach that. I have some, but I can promise to kind of think about it also during the week, to kind of let's say bring more to the table on that. So yeah, because it's really great that you've kind of taken that angle, and I think we should support that. So we could have that as like, maybe it doesn't need the whole session, but it could be, you know, maybe at the start, or we can think where it's slotted, but to give it time and processing. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Yeah, let's do that. But hey, yeah, like if nothing else, how do you feel about it, that the next would still be play testing, and so like use this play format? This is my read also, right or wrong, like that people tend to like it. It's also like Martin, etc. Many people have said it. But how's your feel like? Is it good that we're more insisting on this, that there is this element of play present?
Yes, I think we should totally continue where we're living it right now.
Yeah.
Maybe applying some of this, being more explicit when we jump from meta play to play.
Yeah.
And yeah, but this was really nice. And these last things that Jakob said with the making the world around you playable, sort of like things become interoperable under the framework of games. And also like publication in any way, that would be really nice, especially if we can maybe mix in some early modules, which could be diagrams, designs, even code, like even if they're just very 0.001, that would be really nice.
Yeah, in a way, like code develops in GitHub. Like somebody has an interesting idea and it's very unfinished, but like this sort of development and versioning is something that this actually would benefit from. So yeah, yeah, let's follow that pathway and see how it polishes itself to existence. All right. Thanks. It's I really like, but still thinking that Jakob's framing and how Pablo now put it. Like, it is really about exploring one way. There's infinite ways, but one way to make everything playable, and it does provide this sort of one language of like, oh, that's an object, but this is what you like put a layer on top of it, which then makes it compatible with this layer on top of this abstract idea. And then you can kind of detail those layers. It's that kind of a thing, and I think that's a good thing to keep in mind as kind of a thought. I think it's a good goal. If I would have a goal aspect for our session scene. All right, but hey, yeah, let's end it there. I'll stop the recording.